Welcome to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, sponsored by EarthX, the world's largest environmental experience, and also sponsored by Natural Awakenings magazine. Live your healthiest life on a healthier planet. Now here's your host, Bernice Butler.
Welcome to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio today. We are now well into our fourth season, and we remain just as excited as ever to continue to help you explore and understand that unbreakable relationship between your health and the health of the planet. Here we look at the hottest topics related to our environment and its sustainability and how they affect your health and wellness. Here, issues like climate change, plastic pollution, extreme weather events, and others will meet up with everyday impacts like allergies and asthma, digestive issues and gut health, cancers, lung and heart issues, and more. So listen in today as we continue our series on oceans and waters. And today we're going to focus in on groundwater pollution and water conservation. Now, water is critical. Clean water, in fact, is essential for our health and protection of the environment. And all this month, we have talked about oceans, we've talked about urban waters. And now we want to talk more and drill down on those in-between waters that all of us come into contact with constantly, all day, every day. And that is groundwater and tap water or public utilities water. As I said, clean, fresh water is a limited resource, but it's an essential limited resource. And with all the severe droughts happening in the world, and particularly here in North Texas where I am, the limited supply of fresh water is becoming one of our most precious resources. And every person on earth needs it to survive. Without it, many of us would get sick and even result in death. Now, while almost 70% of the earth is made up of water, many parts of the world suffer from clean water shortages. So conserving water is important because it keeps water pure and clean while protecting the environment. Conserving water means using our water supply wisely and responsibly. And then groundwater pollution and water conservation are two important issues that are interconnected with our clean water or lack thereof. Groundwater is critically important as a natural resource in that it is a key component of our clean water system. Groundwater is often cheaper, more convenient, and less vulnerable to pollution than surface water. Therefore, it's commonly used for our public water supplies. It provides drinking water for an estimated 2 billion people and is used across the world for numerous activities such as growing food, industrial processes, and energy production. Unfortunately, though, it has come under increasing threat from pollution due to our own human activity. And so in today's show, we're going to discuss why we should be concerned about groundwater pollution and its big sister, I like to say, which is water conservation. So groundwater provides the largest source of usable water storage in the United States, and states, specifically California, annually withdraws the largest amount of groundwater of all the states. However, groundwater can be polluted by landfills, by septic tanks, by leaky underground gas tanks, and from overuse of fertilizers and pesticides, among other things. Pollution prevention tips for water conservation include more efficient water use, which begins with us as individuals in the home and place of work. Heating and plumbing water requires chemicals and energy. And so when we waste less water, we conserve fuel and reduce the pollution generated by burning fuel and treating water with chemicals. An important factor when considering preventing further degradation of our planet's global fresh water supply is education. And that's critical if we're going to use this precious resource prudently. Also, groundwater pollution can have far-reaching consequences on human health in affected areas. Toxic pollutants such as heavy metals and chemical waste can linger around in the environment long after they've been released, as well as contaminate our drinking water sources. And this could lead to serious health issues, including cancers, neurological damage, skin rashes, and more, depending on the specific contaminants that are present. In addition to its impact on public health, groundwater can cause economic losses through its effects on agriculture, its effects on industry and tourism. Contaminated groundwater can make farming difficult due to decreased crop yields, or even hinder transportation of goods due to fossil fuel spills that could occur if polluted water bodies are used for shipping or other purposes. It can also harm recreational activities as polluted water impedes fishing, swimming, or boating opportunities available in regions with contaminated groundwater sources. And of course, we've all been bombarded with the news in the last few weeks about the effects of the train crash in Ohio, and it had far-reaching effects on our groundwater as well. So there's probably some groundwater pollution sources that we haven't even thought of or experienced yet. But in any case, it's clear that we must take action against groundwater pollution now, both at an individual level by reducing our own use of pollutants and related substances and products, and at an institutional level by putting legislation in place that protects our environment from dangerous chemicals. Doing so will help us reduce the threats posed by groundwater pollution while allowing us to benefit from the potential offered by these precious natural resources. And of course, a key component in preventing groundwater pollution is implementing better water conservation practices. Now, this is a lot. But here today to help us explore and unpack some of this are three experts, and we're hoping they're going to make us just as smart as they are about all of this. Today, we have Helen Dulac. Helen is Public Education Manager at the North Texas Municipal Water District, where she oversees a variety of water conservation activities, such as the Water for Otter Youth Program, the industrial, commercial, institutional, and multifamily programs, and a public awareness campaign focused on water conservation and water quality. Welcome, Helen. Did I get all of that right?
Absolutely, Bernice, and thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here with this esteemed panel.
Thank you. And before I move on to our next guest, Helen, I want to make a point. Could you tell us very briefly the areas that the North Texas Municipal Water District covers and approximately how many people in North Texas you all are serving?
Yes, we service 10 counties in North Texas, one of the largest being Collin County, and we provide water to over 2 million people up here, and we also provide wastewater and solid waste services to fewer than 2 million people in the same area.
Thank you, Helen. We're so glad you could join us today. And our other guest is Dustan Compton. Dustan is the Conservation Manager at the Tarrant Regional Water District. And with over 15 years of experience, he's been focusing on water conservation programs, community outreach, and regional coordination. Welcome, Dustan. And could you tell us briefly, too, the areas that you all cover and approximately how many people you all service?
Yeah, thank you, Bernice. With Tarrant Regional Water District, we are a wholesale raw water provider here in North Texas, and we serve all or parts of 11 counties, predominantly western Dallas-Fort Worth, Metroplex, and kind of southern southeast as well. And we serve approximately 2.4 million customers at this time.
Well, thank you and welcome, Dustan. We really appreciate you making time to be with us today. And our other guest is Matt Charette. Matt is a senior scientist in marine chemistry and geochemistry at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution in Massachusetts. And prior to his appointment as director of Woods Hole Sea Grant, Matt was director of Woods Hole's Coastal Ocean Institute. And his main research focus has been on submarine groundwater discharge and its role as a vector for chemical transport to the ocean. Welcome, Matt. We're so glad you could be with us today. And did I get all of that right?
Hi, Bernice, you did. I'm pleased to be here, and I'll note I'm one of the few oceanographers who cares about groundwater, studies groundwater. So I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, and we really appreciate it. We had Woods Hole was with us on our first show as well. So again, we really appreciate all of you all for being with us today. Now, we have just 1 minute to go before we go to break. So I want to start with Matt, and we'll finish you up on the other side, Matt. But starting briefly, describe what we are talking about when we use the term groundwater and groundwater pollution.
Sure. So when we talk about groundwater pollution, we're talking about contamination of groundwater from human activities, but it also could be from natural sources. Some of the more common human-related pollution comes from fuel leaks, from underground tanks, solvents from industrial or military activities, or more recently, we've become very concerned with this class of chemical compounds called forever chemicals, also known as PFAS, that come from Teflon, flame retardants, and firefighting foam.
Indeed, and I want to explore that a little deeper, but just before we go to break, I want to lay out, how do people know groundwater from surface water, from any other kind of water?
Yeah, groundwater is, water that's present in aquifers, underground. It's often out of sight, out of mind, which is, one of the reasons we're here to tell you more about it today.
So groundwater is not the water that I see on the side of the road when I walk down or anything like that. It's below the surface.
It's below the surface, and it's moving beneath our feet. That's one of the reasons I'm interested in it. It's moving towards lakes, ponds, and also estuaries and the oceans.
Thank you. We're going to go to break right now. We'll be right back on the other side with these experts. Thank you. We want to give a shout out now to our sponsors. That is Natural Awakenings, Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex Magazine, the Green, Healthy, and Sustainable Living Authority for the DFW Metroplex and North Texas communities. Print issues of Natural Awakenings can be found in all H-E-B stores, Central Markets, Natural Grocers, Sunflower Shops, and many, many other locations, as well as available free for download online at nadallas.com. Check them out. Our other sponsor is North Haven Gardens, serving the Metroplex since 1951, the most respected horticultural establishment in North Texas, offering gardening and plant education, concierge services, DIY classes, gifts, and more. Check them out at nhg.com. And our other sponsor is Lynn Dental Care, practicing dentistry for over 38 years with a holistic approach looking at the whole body. Specializing in periodontics, Dr. Lynn is board certified by the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology. Check them out at lynndentalcare.com. Thank you, sponsors. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, to today's show on oceans and waters, as we focus in today on groundwater pollution and water conservation. And we are back with Helen Dulac with the North Texas Municipal Water District, and Dustan Compton with the Tarrant Regional Water District, and Matt Charette with the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. So thank you all for being with us. Now, before the break, Matt was telling us about various groundwater pollutants, but we did kind of put that flag in the ground to establish what groundwater is. It's not the water that you see on the side of the road or in the grass or whatever that you see on the ground when you walk by. Rather, it's that water below the surface that we're walking on. That's so important. So thank you for establishing that. And I guess you call the rest of the water like surface water, but that's not anything that we particularly use, or do we? Do we, Matt? What is there a benefit, or is there any use to surface water? Does it fit in anywhere in the clean water spectrum?
Certainly, many water districts use surface water sources for their drinking water. Here on Cape Cod, we use in Falmouth, in the town that I live in, we draw our water from a pond, but that pond is entirely fed by groundwater.
Okay. So surface water then would be the lakes and streams?
Lakes, estuaries, oceans, rivers, what we can see and observe.
Okay. Because I know that's where a lot of the water comes from in North Texas, is man-made lakes. So that is surface water. So that's how people come in contact with surface water, is through they could be man-made or natural lakes or bodies of water.
Absolutely.
Okay. Now, you told us about some of the pollutants, Matt, before the break. So what would you say are the top 3 pollutants in terms of quantity and environmental impact?
So if you sort of look back in time and over history, I would say fuel leaks are right up there as, the number one. There are gas stations everywhere across the country and across our planet. That gasoline is stored in tanks underground. sometimes those tanks fail and they leak those fuels into our groundwater, and that can become a contamination concern. And then there are these more recent issues, these class of emerging contaminants of emerging concern, or CECs, like the PFAS, the polyfluoroalkyl substances that come from Teflon and other non-stick flame retardants, firefighting foams, things of that nature.
So Matt, would you say those, when you talk about PFAS, I want to put it in terms everyone can, are those the plastics derivatives? Because we talk a lot about PFAS on this show when we're talking about plastics pollution.
Yeah, so those come from things like, non-stick surfaces like Teflon and also flame retardant clothing, firefighting foam. Those compounds are present in all of those consumer and industrial products.
Okay. So we've got the big ones are fuel leaks, PFAS, and what was the third?
Radioactivity is another thing that I study. That's much less common, more isolated to areas where nuclear fuels are being produced and there's been leaks of tanks there, and also in very, very rare cases, accidents like the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant meltdown that took place after the tsunami in Japan of March 2011.
What about all the runoff from where like right now where I am, it's raining. And so water is running, the runoff from the surface parking lots, from the pesticides that we put on our lawns, things of that nature. Where does all of that go?
Yeah, sometimes that goes into storm drains and, gets treated at wastewater treatment plants. But in case of big storms, there's often, that water goes directly into water bodies because, the treatment systems can't handle the volume of water that's coming from those big rain events. And then in more rural areas, that's just percolating, into the ground on the sides of roadways. And ultimately, some of those compounds make their way into groundwater.
Yeah, I have to think that water that sits on the top of the ground at one point to the eye, it disappears. And I guess it's either evaporated or it goes down into the ground.
That's right. Yeah. A good amount of the water is evaporated depending on where you are on the planet. If you're in a warmer climate, there would be more evaporation than in the more northern areas, but that's a big part. Evaporation is certainly a big part of the equation. Also uptake by plants. So you can have some of those contaminants that are in groundwater making their way into plants before that water makes its way into the aquifer. So there's a lot to that story.
Yeah, and I want to talk about agriculture a little bit more before we leave the show. But my next question to you before we move to our local folks is, at what point, where does the groundwater hook up with the surface water?
Yeah, eventually, groundwater does, make its way to a surface water body. In most cases, whether that be the oceans, along the edge of our continents, or in the interior, a lake or a pond, that groundwater can flow through.
Okay, and thank you for that, Matt. I want to move now to Dustan. Dustan, as a regional municipal water utility company, where does the Tarrant Regional Water District, where does your water come from? And then do you all ever have, or have you ever used groundwater there in your water district?
In North Texas, it was founded, over 150 years ago as settlers were coming into the area, and groundwater provided a lot of the water supply as the area was being settled. Eventually, the population grew so much, generally in North Texas, that the groundwater was not able to supply the increasing population. And then there were some major floods. For example, in the 20s, a major flood occurred in Fort Worth, and Tarrant Regional Water District was created in 1922 or so to provide flood protection and water supply for Tarrant County. And that's when, in the 1930s, Eagle Mountain Lake and Lake Bridgeport was built to provide flood protection and water supply. And there's also ancillary benefit of recreation as well and wildlife habitat. But for North Texas, majority of the water supplies being provided to this area has come from man-made lakes that were built for flood protection and most recently over the last 50 years or so for water supply.
Okay. So, but you all do you still use some groundwater?
We currently do not rely on groundwater at this time. There are some smaller communities that rely on groundwater. There are some groundwater conservation districts that help try to manage groundwater use in our rural areas and across the state of Texas as well. But we are looking at some innovative projects for long-term water supply planning, and one of them includes aquifer storage and recovery. And we're testing to see if the geologic formations in North Texas area can hold some water that we may have in times of plenty and storing it underground, and can we bring that water up when we need it later on or during peak demands? And we're just now starting to test that to see if that's a applicable water supply strategy for North Texas area.
That's interesting, and I'm glad that we're looking at that. And I have to think that some way we're going to figure out we're going to have to almost figure out how to make that work. Maybe so we can stop fighting with Oklahoma over water. And I think we just have about a minute to go before we go to break. And so I want to move to Helen really briefly. We'll start with you, Helen, and then we'll finish up on the other side of the break. And you all also are a regional water utility district. So where does the North Texas Municipal Water District's water come from? And about how much, if any, groundwater are you guys using?
So our water portfolio is primarily surface water. So we currently get our water from Lake Bonham, Lake Jim Chapman, Lavon Lake, Lake Tawakoni, Lake Texoma, and of course, Texas's newest reservoir, Bodark Lake.
Okay, yeah, Bodark is really exciting. Now, is Bodark, is it fully open, or are you guys still filling it, or what?
So Bodark is not open to the public yet. Mm-hmm. The water level needs to rise higher to safely launch boats. And so we're waiting for that to come. And depending on Mother Nature and the rain, that will determine when the grand opening happens.
Okay, good deal. Good deal. Now, as you mentioned, most of it. So you all are not really getting much of, if any, groundwater in your portfolio, or?
That is correct. We're surface water.
All of it. Okay. Now, like Dustan, and maybe even more so because we're a little bit, I think, maybe more north maybe than Fort Worth, we're dealing with this dynamically growing population. And I know that Bodark has been built, to serve some of that need. But like so many other things, like our highways here in North Texas, usually by the time we get something built, it's overrun already. So what are you all looking at for future sustainability of our water supply?
So you're absolutely right, Bernice. We have our staff constantly evaluating our current water supplies and planning for the long-term future of the region we serve. And that means we're projecting and planning 50 to 70 years into the future. So just like Bodark Lake, talk on that began in the 80s. But it took until 2003 before we could even start the permitting process, and that took 12 years. So we have to plan decades out to meet the needs of our region, and we also want to diversify our water portfolio, so we use surface water. We also have reuse with our wetlands and wastewater effluent, and we also have a robust water conservation strategy to help us with our water in the future. So there's not one single solution that most water suppliers rely on.
Good deal, and we'll examine that a little bit more. We want to go to break now, and we'll be right back on the other side with Helen Dulac with the North Texas Municipal Water District, Dustan Compton with the Tarrant Regional Water District, and Matt Charette with Woods Hole Institute. Thank you all. We'll be right back on the other side. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, to today's show on oceans and waters, focusing in on groundwater pollution and water conservation. And we have with us three experts, and they're just They're making us smarter, so we're very indebted to them. Now, Matt, I want to go back to you. You study groundwater pollution in coastal areas. So how is groundwater pollution different, better or worse perhaps, in coastal areas versus, I guess, inland areas, cities and rural areas? What's the difference? What do you learn from the coastal areas that helps to inform what we need to do or what's happening to us in the more urban or inland areas?
Yeah, and I would say, Bernice, in the more urban areas, you might expect to see a wider range of groundwater contamination issues, whereas in rural coastal areas, it's more likely that you'd be concerned by nutrient pollution of groundwater, because in those areas, most people are using septic systems for their wastewater needs, versus in urban areas, almost everybody is tied into a centralized wastewater treatment plant.
So that when they're using the septic systems, that's more opportunity for pollution?
That's right. Septic systems really just collect the solids that we flush down the toilet. They don't really treat the groundwater for any kind of contaminants that might be going down the drain. In our case, the big concern is nitrogen, because when that nitrogen from our septic tanks makes its way into the groundwater, and that groundwater makes its way into our coastal estuaries, it leads to major impacts on coastal ecosystems. We get algae blooms that can affect water quality quite severely.
Okay. So what, Matt, would you say are the most widespread health impacts of groundwater pollution?
Yeah, a really good example and a sad example of health impacts from groundwater contamination is in Bangladesh. So, back about 100, 150 years ago in Bangladesh, they used surface water sources for their drinking water, and there became serious issues with bacterial contamination of that water that led to human health issues, and so they turned to groundwater. The problem with that was, unbeknownst to them at the time, the Ganges-Brahmaputra River brought over thousands of years a great amount of arsenic down into the floodplain, which settled out and contaminated the groundwater with arsenic. And so that led to, they got rid of the bacterial issue, but then there became issues with poisoning from arsenic contamination in groundwater. So that is a classic and unfortunate example of large-scale human health impacts from groundwater drinking.
And I have to think that as the world evolves and grows, that we may be at ever increasing risk of new and more and various groundwater pollutants. Because as you mentioned that one with the radioactivity, it certainly makes, I hadn't heard that before, but it makes sense that would be a problem in those areas that are near. And of course, many other areas of our environment are being affected by the PFAS. Again, we don't tend to think that it's going to be effective with our water, because I have to think that the PFAS may even be. Well, let me ask the regional water folks. Do you ever find anything like PFAS in your water? I know that you all do lots and lots of testing and recycling that water and cleansing it. So let me start with you, Dustan. Could you tell us, though, about your procedure for making sure that the municipal water supply is clean and safe?
Yeah, at our Charette Regional Water District, we only provide raw water, our surface water from our lakes, to our customer cities, cities of Fort Worth, Arlington, Mansfield, and the Trinity River Authority. And so that's our role, is to provide their needs of water supply, and then they treat it to drinking water standards and clean it up and make it safe for our communities. We do have some watershed protection programs, and we try to work with large landowners in our watersheds of our lakes to help control sediment or any other pollutants that may be attached to that, to increase the water quality benefit of our water supply situation. But we're not in the water treatment process of our water supply.
I gotcha. And I know that Helen's district is, and so I'll talk to her a little bit more about that. And you kept focusing on raw water. What is raw water?
You're right. That's your surface water that's not treated to drinking water standards.
I gotcha. And so when it gets to the city of Arlington or the city of Fort Worth water utility, they do all of that.
They have the processes, yes.
You got the easy job. So let's jump to Helen, because I know that you all are really the utility. Tell us about what you all do and how you keep that water clean and safe.
Yes, so the North Texas Municipal Water District is actually a wholesale water provider. So we do take surface water and treat it, but then we send it to different cities and utility districts for them to distribute directly to customers. So we do not have direct connections to homes or businesses, nor do we do any billing. So different organizations that receive our water may or may not do additional treatment to that water. They store it in tanks on site and then distribute it through their own pipes. So there is a time when once we sell or deliver the water, it is not our water anymore. Okay. It becomes that city or utility's water. So recently, the EPA has just announced their new PFAS standards and roadmap. So, of course, the district is following that and looking at that. And as part of that process, several of our member cities have collected and tested samples that have resulted in non-detectable levels of PFAS. And also the industries and manufacturing that typically produce PFAS are not prevalent in the North Texas Municipal District's watershed. So that's probably why we don't have those detectable limits. And just to let people know that the district we always monitor our water, and we take hundreds of samples every day to make sure that our water meets and exceeds drinking water standards set up by the EPA and the Texas Commission of Environmental Quality. And we do have a superior water system rating from the TCEQ this year and for many years running.
Okay. So unlike Dustan, where they're doing raw water, you're doing wholesale water, where you have done some cleansing, and when you send it out to those providers who may or may not do more work to it, but when you send it out to them, you have done testing and you've done some processes to make sure it's at drinking water standard.
That's absolutely correct.
Now, I do know that you all do some exciting and very different things to clean your water, recycle your water. Could you tell us about those?
So we have a two-step disinfection process, and one of those steps is ozone. So the North Texas Municipal Water District is one of the largest generators of ozone in Texas and also in the United States. We have 2 ozone generation facilities at our Wiley Water Treatment Plant where we actually make ozone and we bubble that through the water. And currently ozone is the strongest disinfectant known to man. And it also helps with the taste and odor of our water. So that's one new technology that we implement at the Water District. And then also to help supplement our water supply, we have our East Fork Water Reuse Project and the John Bunker Sands Wetlands, where we take water out of the Trinity River, pass it through the wetlands, and then the plants in the wetland help to polish and remove some of the different nutrients in the water. And then that water is piped underground 40 miles into Lavon Lake and is stored in Lavon Lake to become our future water supply.
Okay. Now, what do y'all do for the sewage? Is the sewage recycled or reclaimed, or what do y'all do with that?
So because the district does offer wastewater services to certain cities in North Texas, our wastewater treatment, or many of our wastewater treatment plants, sit on a creek that feed into Lavon Lake. So that treated wastewater, which is treated to near drinking water standards, is discharged and called effluent. So that effluent goes into the creek and then travels back into Lavon, where it can be entered back into this water cycle.
Is that what you call that? That's what you're describing? Is that the reclamation process?
So yes, that is considered reclamation. It's also, some people refer to it as the one water cycle. And also that treated effluent, some cities get some of that effluent and they use it to water medians and golf courses in their city.
Oh, indeed. Very good. I love to call John Bunker Sands the triple bottom line. Now, it's providing municipal water, it's reclaiming, recycling, but it's also a fantastic recreation area. And we just have about a minute to go. And Dustan, I believe that are you all doing something like that as well in the Charette Regional Water District?
Yes, we have a 2,000-acre wetland system as well near our Richland Chambers Reservoir water supply lake. That's 60 miles southeast of Dallas or so, and where we pull water from the Trinity River as well. And it's very sediment heavy laden, and we run it through our wetland system, drop the sediments, drop the nutrients, and bring it into our reservoir to put into our water supply process.
Very good. And your wetland system is called what? Is it a place where people can go for recreational purposes, or?
Yeah, it's called the George W. Shannon Wetlands, and it is part of a partnership with the Texas Parks and Wildlife. It's technically, we don't have a lot of public facilities there that are open at all times of the hours, but I believe there is public access for bird watching, maybe some hunting every now and then through the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, but it is mainly for part of our water supply strategy and environmental habitat.
But good. It's open, though, for nature, recreational use. So it's what I call triple bottom line. I love that. We're going to go ahead and go to break now, and we'll be right back on the other side with Helen Dulac with the North Texas Municipal Water District, Dustan Compton with the Tarrant Regional Water District, and Matt Charette with the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. We'll be right back. We want to give a shout out now to our sponsors. That is Natural Awakenings, Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex Magazine, The Green, Healthy, and Sustainable Living Authority for the DFW Metroplex and North Texas communities. Print issues of Natural Awakenings can be found in all H-E-B stores, all Central Markets, natural grocers, sunflower shops, and many, many other locations, as well as available free for download online at nadallas.com. Check them out. Our other sponsor is North Haven Gardens, serving the Metroplex since 1951, the most respected horticultural establishment in North Texas, offering gardening and plant education, concierge services, DIY classes, gifts, and more. Check them out at nhg.com. And our other sponsor is Lynn Dental Care, practicing dentistry for over 38 years with a holistic approach, none mercury, looking at the whole body. Specializing in periodontics, Dr. Lynn is board certified by the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology. Check them out at lindentalcare.com. Thank you, sponsors. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio. To today's show on oceans and waters, and we're focusing in on groundwater pollution and water conservation. And we are back with our experts who are making us smarter. And so I want to go back and to Matt with Woods Hole Institute and talk to you a little bit about how does climate change impact our groundwater situation and groundwater pollution, Matt?
Yeah, so the first example that comes to mind on how climate change can impact groundwater pollution has to do with rising sea levels. So you may know that as the planet warms, the ice sheets and glaciers are melting, putting more fresh water into the oceans, leading to rising sea levels. That can lead to saltwater intrusion of groundwater along our coastlines. And there are a fair number of groundwater wells that serve our coastal communities in those coastal areas. And many of those wells are under threat from saltwater intrusion and will have to be moved back or relocated in order to avoid that particular issue.
The seas are rising, and that's saltwater. And because they're rising, and that then is spilling over or intruding into our groundwater.
Yeah, and it actually comes in from underneath. And and it moves in, from sea towards the land, and can ultimately intersect some of those drinking water wells and irrigation wells that are located fairly close to the coastline.
Okay, good deal then. I say good deal because that means that we here in North Texas are nowhere near anybody's ocean. And, and so we don't really have to worry about that aspect of things. No salt water intruding into Bodark or any of the other lakes from which we draw our water.
Exactly. And if I can just mention one other example of climate change impacts on groundwater pollution, has to do with the thawing of permafrost in our high latitude Arctic ocean. As you know, with the warming planet, the Arctic is one of the fastest warming areas in the globe, and that's leading to thawing of permafrost or previously permanently frozen soils that it turns out contain a fair amount of mercury. And mercury, as the permafrost is thawing, is making its way into rivers and estuaries along the Arctic coastline, where it can then work its way up the food chain, ultimately ending up into fish that indigenous communities rely upon for sustenance.
Okay, indeed. Are there any other ways that you can think of, or that you all as scientists might suspect that climate change could be affecting our groundwater, even inland? Because I'm thinking things seep down, and that which seeps down can affect that groundwater. And I have to think that there may be some climate change implications.
Sure, yeah. I'd love to hear Dustan and Helen's thoughts on, changing weather patterns that, are expected to come with changing climate. Some areas that are currently dry are expected to get wetter. Some wetter areas are expected to get drier. Whether or not, we're starting to see those effects in different areas or not is an open question, but it's certainly a concern.
Yes, and we here in North Texas are dry and drought prone, and all the prognostications I've heard is that we're going to become drier and more drought prone. So let me back to you, Dustan, and I have to think that you guys have these discussions over at the Tarrant Regional Water District about the extreme weather. And perhaps planning, as Helen mentioned, you guys have to plan years in advance. So for both of you all, how are you thinking about or talking about protecting ourselves or being sustainable with increased droughts and hotter weather? Dustan, we'll start with you.
That's a good question. This part of Texas, we are projected to have more intensity when we're talking these extremes. And so when it is going to be drought, it's projected to be more intense drought. And when we get rain, it's projected to have more intensity, and so maybe not as spread out across the year or so. So those are what the science and the reports are showing, and what we're reading about. And we are doing things to protect our water supplies for sustainability and looking to the future. Like Helen mentioned, all water providers also have to look at long-term plans, and we have to update water conservation plans every 5 years, and as part of our strategy to meet our region's doubling of a population over the next 50 years or so, it has to take multiple approaches, multiple strategies, multiple sources of water to meet those needs. And for Tarrant Regional Water District, I mentioned that we are looking at aquifer storage and recovery. That's a way to maybe have a water supply that may not be prone to evaporation intensity that we have in the summer. We lose a lot of water just to the natural water cycle. We have the wetland system that helps recycle water, indirect reuse, and add to our water supply, and currently contributes about 18 to 20% of our water supply every year. And our next water supply project is going to be another wetland system for our Cedar Creek Reservoir as well. So along with current supplies, looking at reuse, supplies, innovative strategies, and water conservation. That's what's going to help drive our water demands, or meeting those water demands in the future.
Indeed. And I know that you guys connect with the various water districts and probably share some things, because I have to think that aquifer project, which really sounds exciting and promising, but I have to think that that's something that can be, if not necessarily has to be, shared with other water districts.
Yeah, we coordinate with a lot of our local water providers, such as Dallas Water Utilities, Upper Trinity Regional Water District, and North Texas Municipal Water District on major projects with these huge infrastructure costs, as well as just locally for small programs and efforts and outreach and coordination as well.
Now, who does the Upper Trinity serve? I've heard of them, but I'm not familiar with their service area.
Yeah, I think their service area covers a lot of the Denton County area, kind of the northern part of the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, and some of that northern portion.
Okay. Helen, what kinds of things, or because I think you had told me you guys recently updated some of your plans. What kind of things are you all looking for the future, which, again, as we just talked about, includes extremes, extreme drought, extreme dryness, extreme no rain, and some others?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Dustan touched on the 5-year water conservation plan. And also water providers have some sort of drought plan. We all call them something different. But North Texas Municipal Water District does have a water conservation plan and a water resource and emergency management plan, which is also known as a drought contingency plan. And when we create both of these plans, we have our engineers and planners look at climate variability as much as possible when we forecast into the future. And we actually do modeling. So we do modeling that forecasts what the future will look like, and it plugs in variable weather and climate scenarios. And we run multiple models, so not just one, more like 50 to 100 of these different models to see how our water supplies can hold up in these different conditions. And then from that data, we're able to plan better for the future and to work that into these water conservation and drought plans. And the next step and the next piece of that, like Dustan mentioned, is we have to work locally and regionally with those that we serve to bring awareness and education about water conservation to them and to the public, which is a critical tool to combat climate change.
It really is. I mentioned that just very briefly about education, and I know that is a really big deal. So last word, we just have about a couple of minutes to go. Helen, what would you say perhaps is the single most effective water conservation thing or tool in your district?
So I believe it is this collaboration we have with the water suppliers and then also the cities and utilities that we serve, because we can't do, one water provider cannot solve all the problems in any community. It takes everybody working together. So it takes support. So when we create those plans, so we're currently working on our update to our water conservation and our drought plans right now. And we include our member cities and customers in those. We have multiple meetings with them. We even have public meetings where the public can come and give input and learn about the plans. So it's not a closed door process. It's a very open process and everyone is welcome. We take feedback from everybody to help craft these plans, and then they're submitted into the state of Texas. And those plans roll up into a state water conservation plan. And all of that is available from the Texas Water Development Board. But going back to more locally, to more boots on the ground, or to have those one-on-one connections, the North Texas Municipal Water District has a couple of programs that I think are leading the way in that. We have the Industrial, Commercial, Institutional, and Multifamily Program, where we offer 13 of our cities free water opportunity surveys to their businesses to find water-saving opportunities. And then also we have innovative and regional water conservation outreach, such as our award-winning No Water Trivia, where we are able to take water trivia to different businesses that rely on water for their product and meet people where they are to let them learn about water conservation and direct calls of action that they can do to help save water.
Indeed. Thank you, Helen. Matt, last word. What is it that keeps you up at night, perhaps, about groundwater contamination? What's on the future, and what should we be concerned about?
The big one is a local issue. It's the fact that, we've had a huge housing boom here on Cape Cod. It's a tourist area. The groundwater nutrient pollution has led to huge ecological impacts in our coastal water bodies, and it's a multi-billion-dollar problem. We need to deal with it. That's what keeps me up at night.
Yeah, because it sounds like it could infect health as well as economics, too. Thank you all so much. It's been a pleasure. We have been with Dustan Compton, who is Conservation Manager at the Tarrant Regional Water District, Helen Dulac with the North Texas Municipal Water District, and with Matt Charette, who is with the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. Thank you all so much for taking time to join us. We really appreciate it. And thank you, listeners, for listening in today to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio. The conversation starts here, but our goal is for it to continue in your home, in your social circles, your workplaces, at the water cooler, and in the grocery checkout line, so that we can all work together to realize that healthy living is simply not possible without a healthy planet. Our culture is the result of 1 trillion tiny acts taken by billions of people every day like yourselves. And each of those tiny acts can seem insignificant, but all of them add up, one way or the other, to the change that we each live through. This is your host, Bernice Butler. Thank you for listening today, and join us again next week for more Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, and listen to any of our past shows on podcast wherever you get yours. Thank you.